Well, hey there folks, and thank you for joining me for week number 27 on our Chronological Bible-in-a-Year reading challenge. This week we're continuing the narrative by starting the book of 2 Kings. We're going to be introduced to Elisha and Elijah, some of your favorite characters. The book of Jonah features this week as well. So a lot of Sunday school classic characters coming up this week. I'm sure you're going to love it. Until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's tutorial. This week in our readings, we are very much in the back and forth narrative between what is happening in the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And much like we experience when we're reading through the history of David in the book of Samuel, you remember that? We'd read the narrative in Samuel and then intersperse it with Psalms that David wrote during that time in history. We spent quite a number of weeks doing that. Well, in a similar way, this is what we're going to be doing for about 7 or 8 weeks. We're going to be finishing off the book of Kings and Chronicles, the narrative, but interspersing it with various prophets. We did that last week with our first prophetic book, the book of Obadiah, and we're going to do that again this week with Jonah. One of the things that both Obadiah and Jonah have in common is that they are not only the earliest of the prophetic books, but they also kind of uniquely have their ministry to people who are not Israel. They have their ministry to outside nations, which also makes them kind of unique amongst the prophetic books. Anyway, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Jonah. You're going to enjoy that this week. So, this week in the narrative, we're going to be reading the first 15 chapters of 2 Kings and a few chapters in the book of Chronicles, and this is what we're going to see. Up north, we're going to be introduced to 11 more kings. So with the 7 kings last week, that takes us to 18 kings in total in the north, based in Samaria, okay? And basically, as I said last week, all of these kings are bad. All of them are bad and lead Israel into sin and idolatry, and things just go downhill, okay? There is one possible shining light with a king called Jehu, who because of his passion for God goes on a bit of a killing spree, okay? And he kills 2 kings. He kills Queen Jezebel, okay? Pushes her off a city wall. She's eaten by dogs. Just charming. And he also kills and destroys all of Ahab's family. So, you know, that's kind of a good thing, all right? That's King Jehu, but basically everyone in the north is bad. Down south, we're introduced this week to 3 more kings. So that takes us to 10 in total, plus the Queen Mother who ruled there for a certain period of time. And in Judah, as you know, down south, some of the kings are good, some of the kings are bad. When they have a good king, things go well. When they have a bad king, things go poorly. They very much have an up and down relationship in Judah. And you'll notice, of course, when you read Chronicles, it deals exclusively with what's happening in Judah, doesn't really care about what's happening at north. Okay, couple of things I want you to pay attention to this week, really important. The first one is this: covenant. God is faithful to his covenant promises. And there's 3 covenants in particular that are in play this week that I want you to pay attention to. The first one is that God is faithful to his covenant to Moses. When Israel was one nation together at Sinai, God said to them through Moses, if you disobey, curses will come upon you. If you obey, then you will be blessed. And that is what we see come about in both kingdoms in really stark terms this week. In fact, this week we're going to read stories about God sending fire from heaven and burning people alive. We're going to read stories about leprosy coming upon disobedient people. This is exactly what happened in the era of Moses, okay? In those early stories in Numbers when the law first came. That stuff is still happening today in these readings this week because God is faithful to his covenant to Moses. If you go back and you read Deuteronomy 28, you know, the chapter that has the blessings and the curses, many of those curses we see take place this week as the kings of God's kingdoms disobey. Foreign armies come in, their temple is plundered, their cities are conquered, people are taken captive, their treasuries and their wealth is stolen from them. Even at one point, get this, one of the sieges on the cities in Samaria was so bad that women ended up eating their own children just to survive. And while that sounds like a shocking thing, it's not surprising, because Moses prophesied that exact thing way back in Deuteronomy chapter 28. What's the point? The point is God is faithful to his covenant promises and is faithful to his covenant with Moses. I want you to see that this week. The other covenant he's faithful to that gets a mention this week is his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As you read the stories in the north, no matter how bad things get, this week anyway, God says he was not yet willing to destroy them or cast them from his presence because of his faithfulness to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God extends mercy upon mercy upon mercy to the northern kingdom, and it says at this point in history, he was not yet willing to completely destroy them. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you, but next week that changes, that God has enough with them, and he does see the destruction of this kingdom, but we're not there yet. I want you to pay attention to that verse when you reach it this week. But down south, things are a little different, because God is faithful to another covenant that is applicable in Judah, and it's the covenant God made with David. God made David a promise that no matter how bad things got down south, David would always have one of his sons on the throne. And no matter how bad things take place in Judah and Jerusalem, that's what we see. David to Solomon, Solomon to Rehoboam, on and on and on, down the line in all the 10 kings that we're going to be reading about. Even when the queen had the throne for a period of time, God made sure that a son of David would be on the throne. That doesn't happen in the north, by the way. Okay? Judah always stays in the hands of a Judean king from the line of David. That doesn't happen in the north. In the north, there's assassinations and coups and takeovers of the throne as different families vie for power. In fact, I think over the history of Israel, there's about 9 families in total that are in charge of the throne at one stage or the other from different tribes. You know, Dan and Naphtali, I think, and it all starts with Ephraim, and Issachar, I think, has it for a while. But down south, God is faithful to David, and only his family lines stay on that throne. So I want you to pay attention. God is faithful to covenant. The second thing I want you to notice this week, and this is a little bit more fun, is the prophets, all right? That's one of the reasons that we're reading so many chapters of Kings this week, is because a whole bunch of those chapters is dedicated to the ministry of Elijah and now Elisha. Okay, so this week we're going to be reading Elijah, Elisha, and Jonah, and I want you to pay attention to the ministry of these men and how they foreshadow the coming ministry of the great prophet that Moses prophesied about that will come in the first century. Get this. Elijah does not die physically. He ascends to heaven. His physical body does not see decay, but he ascends into heaven in a whirlwind. Who does that remind you of in the first century? Elisha, his successor, is a miracle worker. He does heaps of miracles. He raises people from the dead. He heals lepers. He feeds a multitude of men with just a few loaves of bread. That's Elisha. Who does that remind you of that comes about in the first century? And then we have Jonah, buried in the depths of the sea for 3 days and 3 nights before being resurrected and coming back on the land. Who does that remind you of in the first century? The sign of Jonah. Well, no surprises, all right? These men all in various ways foreshadow the ministry of the coming prophet Jesus. In fact, even Jonah, this is a bit subtle, you may not pick this up, but Jonah prophesies to Nineveh, gives them 40 days to repent, or else 120,000 of them will die. Jesus prophesies to Jerusalem, gives them 40 years to repent. And history shows that because they don't, 1.2 million of them die or are taken captive. 40 days, 40 years. 120,000, 1,2,000, 1.2 million. the correlation is quite astounding between Jonah and Jesus, and that's a subtle one that you may not have picked up. Anyway, this week, enjoy your narrative, enjoy Jonah. I insist you read Jonah in one sitting, all right? It's only 4 chapters. You should be able to do that quite easily. All right, I'm going to go get out into my backyard, go install something on a gate, and you guys enjoy your readings this week. I'll see you next week for week number 28. Really proud of you for getting this far. I'll see you on the other side. Bye. That's it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoy your readings this week. Remember, allow yourself time to read as much as you can in one sitting. Don't get lost in the detail. Just keep going and watch the Bible's big story unfold before you. Remember also to hit me up on our social media channels or website, and I'll see you next time.